In this video, I will talk to you about orals and posters. So why do we have oral presentation assignments? There's many reasons, but mostly it is because you can showcase your knowledge in presentations. You can prove your understanding of the topic. It is also a great way to enhance your verbal skills and build your confidence in speaking persuasively and clearly. This is a great way to share insights and make complex ideas visible to a wider audience. If you are going to be a teacher one day, this is a way for you to practice teaching and engaging with your students. Also, if you're going to be a future academic, this is an important skill as we do as researchers share our research via conference presentations. And if you would like to see an example of what this looks like, I've got a video in my channel that you can see on the screen there that is an oral presentation at a conference. So some tips for you. Oral assignment is structured in the same way as any other type of assignment in that it has an introduction, body section, and conclusion. In the introduction, you should introduce yourself, capture the attention of the audience, and introduce the topic and background information necessary to understand the topic. The body section should be structured strategically and clearly and logically, and should be broken up into small and understandable parts that people can easily navigate as you are speaking. Make sure to use signposting language like previously I talked about this, now I'm going to talk about that, because remember, people listening to your oral presentation can't pause and go back like you can in this video. So you need to be able to engage them in a way that will help them remember what you said before. The conclusion then summarizes the key points of what you want to say and highlights perhaps the implications of whatever it is that you discussed. So some important tips for you to remember. Remember that your oral presentation is a response to a task that you've been given. So make sure to address the topic that they've given you and to clearly refer back to the marking criteria. It is important not to try to memorize your presentation word for word, but practice it and practice it with an audience at some time. The reason why I say don't practice it word for word is because if you get up and speak and you forget the first word and you have memorized the whole thing word for word, you also forget the whole rest of your presentation. It is much better to use your slides or handouts as a starting point to remind you of what you wanted to say, and then learn the content but not the presentation itself. You should practice, and certainly practice by yourself as many times as possible, but eventually practice with an audience, say your friends or your fellow students, so that you can make sure that you can help work through that anxiety that often comes from speaking in front of people. In academic assignments, like any other assignment, oral presentations also require references. So wherever you are referring to ideas of others, so quotations, statistical data, images, etc., you should include references. And make sure to carefully check the timing that you've been given so that you don't go over time. There's a couple of reasons here. First, you usually will lose marks if you go over time. But secondly, it also annoys your audience when you are going over time. Now, sometimes you also have to present in a group, and there are some additional tips that you should remember for group presentations. Firstly, your time that you've been given is for the whole group, which means you should divide the time and material carefully so that each of you have equal representation in your group presentation on the day. Make sure to also practice the transition between speakers. How will you introduce the next person and so on? And remember that this introduction and switching takes time away from that larger time that you have. So you need to practice to make sure you fit within the time. When it is a group presentation, it is all of you together. So you should use things like we instead of I, so as to showcase that you've worked together on this presentation. Make sure to also keep time for each other and help others know when it is time for them to stop and hand over to the next person. The only other big tip for group presentations is that you should be aware of negative body language, particularly when you are not speaking. Because usually when you are doing a group presentation, you all stand there together. And the one person speaking is doing a very good job, but the other people on the side are standing around waiting for their time. And if you are standing around there looking awkward, looking like you're not interested in the presentation, for example, that gets conveyed to the audience really quickly and can negatively impact the overall impression the audience has of your group presentation. So in terms of developing slides, it's important to make sure that people can actually read what it is you have on your slides. So we recommend using a large font that is at least 20 points, and preferably a font that is easy to read. Remember that something like Times New Roman is actually harder to read on the screen. So use something like Arial as an easy way for people to read your text. The text on this slide, for example, is Arial 20-point font. Make sure to check your spelling and grammar, which I know sounds obvious, but on visual presentations, it is extra obvious when there is a spelling and grammar mistake, because people in the audience, their brains immediately notice the error on the slide. So make sure to be very careful with that. Keep it simple and professional. Remember, you are not being marked on how wonderful you can use PowerPoint or Canva or any of those things. You are being marked on how you are conveying your ideas. So keep it simple, keep it professional and easy to follow. If you're going to use pictures, make sure to check the copyright with them, because some pictures do have copyright issues. You can, for example, use the Open Clip Art website for you to find images. Don't just copy things off Google. If you are going to use images, make sure that they are relevant images. So images related to the content or statistical graphs or things like that. Not just cute pictures of cats that are exciting and interesting maybe for you, but is not actually relevant to convey the idea of what it is that you're trying to say. Try and make sure that your clarity of your ideas are clear. And the best way to do this is to limit the amount of slides and the amount of text on slides. A good rule of thumb is 1 slide per minute. So if you've got a 20-minute presentation, that is 20 slides. And in terms of your font, this is an example of what happens when people change their font or use lots of different colors. It gets very confusing for you as the audience. It's hard to read. Some fonts are easier, some fonts are harder. You're starting to wonder, why is this word in a different font than this other word? In the second line, for example, consistent seems to be bigger than the rest of the sentence. So you're wondering, maybe it's more important, or maybe font choice because it's bolded is more important, or maybe that one that has the yellow highlighting at the end is important. So this confuses the audience, and because they are listening to you and thinking and reading the slides together, that can really confuse people, and then your idea is not clear for the audience. Also, try and avoid colors as much as possible. If you're going to pick a color, use one color at a time, not lots of different ones. Use the color with a purpose, so that it's maybe to identify the key point in each line rather than just random colors so that it looks extra colorful. And one other thing to remember is that capital letters are actually harder to read than normal sized letters. So if you're going to use all caps, remember also it conveys to people that it seems like you're yelling at them. So you want to make sure that if you're going to use all caps, there needs to be a really important reason for it. And always make sure that the content is most important. It's the substance, not the style, that you get marked on. When you are going to the class to deliver your presentation, arrive early so that you can make sure that the technology that you're going to use is there, working properly. You've got everything set up. You've brought your USB or whatever it is to convey your presentation to the slide deck in the room. Make sure to be practical. Make sure everyone can hear you. Speak loudly and clearly, those sorts of things. Relax. I know it's nervous time for you to be standing in front of the class, but try and appear relaxed. This is a way to convey to the audience that you know what you're talking about. So smile. Maybe you can have a little bit of quiet time beforehand to get you in the right zone so that you can present clearly. So don't talk too slowly or be walking around all the time. Be clearly paced. Stand still when you are speaking, but don't look like you are a statue. Be natural, but don't move around, because moving around can be quite confusing. If you're going to move from one point to another point and then stand still. Don't move around from one leg to the other or something like that, because that distracts the audience. And make eye contact with your audience. So you're speaking with your audience. You're not speaking to the wall at the back. Make contact with them so that they feel like you're speaking with them. So what happens if you're scared? This is a very common thing for people to be anxious speaking in front of people. But remember that your anxiety actually gives your presentation some excitement and interest. It makes you seem like you're an effective speaker that's excited about their topic. And if you don't have that, you seem boring and one of those people who just drones on in a monotone style. So practice. If you practice lots, you know your content, so you can convey to yourself that you know your content, and that can help you overcome some of that initial problems that you have when you stand up in front of the room. As I said before, pretend to be happy and not worried. So you can do this quite easily by just dropping your shoulders, breathing calmly, and smiling. And I know it sounds a little bit lame, but visualizing your success is actually useful, because then you can tell yourself, I know my content, I can do this. And this can help you get over that initial anxiety, because usually the anxiety is actually just the very start when you have to start speaking. Once you get into it, it's much easier. So if you harness that anxiety, maybe put the first things you're going to say on your title slide, and then move on from there. You will work through your anxiety. Some important tips to remember is that you're speaking with your audience, you're not speaking at your audience. So have a conversation with them. Use conversational, everyday language. Use personal pronouns like I, we, you. Engage with them, right? Avoid those very formal academic essay words. If you do have to use subject-specific terminology, that's fine. But remember, you need to define them properly so that people know what you're meaning, and to pronounce them correctly. And you can use jargon, but try and avoid them as much as possible. And if you're going to use it, explain what it means. Same with abbreviations. Remember, your audience may not have done all the reading you did on this topic, so they don't know what you're talking about if you don't explain it to them. Of course, many presentations also include question time at the end, so it is a good idea to prepare beforehand and anticipate some likely questions. You never know exactly what they're going to ask, but if you prepare some questions, that'll help you, one, with your anxiety, and two, if they do ask the question, you have a ready-made answer. So when you start talking, if the teacher in the class hasn't already explained this to the people, explain when you are going to be taking these questions during the session or afterwards, for example. If they're asking you a question and you just need that little bit of time to think in your head to get your ideas together, comment on the question before you talk about it. So you don't have to just say, thank you for that question, that's very interesting. You can rephrase that question, did you mean, for example, or do some things like a comment on, oh, that's an interesting question, it relates to this recent news article that we heard about, or something like that. That'll help you just get your ideas together before you start speaking. Remember that they're not trying to trip you up. They're just genuinely interested. So have open body language, be friendly, take it on board as a genuine interest in your topic, not as a personal attack. Avoid having an argument with someone, and don't rush your answer. Take your time, answer it properly, and then ask them, does that answer your question? So that they feel that you are engaging with them. Now, we also have poster assignments quite often, and it's important to note that just like the oral presentations, they are developing essential skills. It's a way for you to simplify really complex ideas in a very visual manner. And on the screen on the side there, you can see an example of a poster that I did at an online conference a couple of years ago, and you can see how simple it is, yet it conveys an entire paper that I was talking about. So a poster is there for you to communicate your ideas visually, using the design to make the findings stand out and explain key ideas to people. The posters are also a way to engage in discussions. Often when you make a poster, if it is at a conference or if it has one of those conference-based assignments in the class, they will post the posters on the wall, and you have to stand next to your poster and talk to them and explain your poster and talk with your peers and ask questions and these sorts of things. It's a great way to engage in discussions about your topic. Also a great way to get feedback on your work, particularly if it's early work that you are working on to develop later into a more complex idea. And if you are one day going to be an academic, for example, it is something that we do as conferences. So it's a way to develop your academic presence and network with others in your field. Remember some important things. An academic poster is not the same as the poster that you may have made at school before. It is not a scrapbook. It's not one of those things where you go and get magazines and cut out pictures and letters and stick them on a piece of cardboard, right? It is a proper academic assignment where you tell the story about your idea and that you explain clearly and accurately, just like anything else. If you've got text on there, you are including references just like in other assignments. If you've got pictures in there, they need to be clear and relevant related to your topic. So remember the image copyright issue we had with the orals before. This is also the case for poster presentations, because remember, posters are visible to everyone, so there's copyright concerns. Make sure that there is a balance between text and visuals. Remember, a poster is a visual presentation, so you want to engage the audience with prettiness, not just text, but it does need to have enough detail so it's clear what it is you're talking about. If you are going to be presenting it in class, I would encourage you to show it to someone else to see whether it makes sense. When you are printing it out, make sure it is big enough so that people can actually read it. The general guideline is they should be able to stand at least a meter away from it and still be able to read it. And make sure to include proper referencing. So those are oral and poster assignments. Good luck.